My sister dropped her children off at my place and demanded that I look after them while she went on an 8-week holiday. When I threatened to report her to the police, she staged an attack on me in my own home to get the children back. Unlike real gold, children raised as golden children are never as pure as their parents think. My sister always got her way, no matter how nasty or irrational she was towards me. She always got away with it because she was her golden miracle. It probably helped that my sister was stunningly beautiful. She had thick, curly hair and light eyes, and my mother had spent her life comparing us based on our looks. I have dark eyes and straight hair, and I was never as pretty as my sister. My mother loved to make comments comparing us. After we both became teenagers, she would constantly tell me to try to dress like my sister and ask her to teach me about makeup. But my sister would also bully me and make fun of me if I ever asked her to help me be prettier. So we grew up with extreme dislike for each other. I think my sister just adopted the worst traits we saw in our mother, while I rejected them all. I think my mom's lifelong practice of putting her on a pedestal simply for being pretty turned her into a rotten person who doesn't care about anyone but herself and thinks she can get away with anything just because of her looks. The way my mom compared us and put me down has caused me to have self-esteem issues, and as an adult, I am very quiet and reserved, and some people describe me as spineless. I have recently been to therapy to try to find a stronger core, although I have had a hard time standing up for myself in relationships. For the first time, I feel like the way my family treated me has truly messed me up as an adult, and I have a hard time maintaining healthy friendships or romantic relationships. My sister even slept with my boyfriend in high school during her senior year, for no real reason. She never liked him and told me many times that she thought he was ugly. My parents told me to forget the past when they found out what happened. My sister wasn't even punished in any way, and that was the moment I truly realized how much they chose her over me. The way my dad just stood by and watched my mom emotionally irritate me for years made me feel like no man would ever stand by my side or see value in me, and I have a very hard time trusting and connecting in relationships. But my whole life wasn't completely horrible because of my mom and sister, because the only good thing about being the ugly sister growing up was that I had no social life and spent all my time studying. I ended up graduating with honors and getting a full scholarship to my dream university, which was great, because my mom told me the night before high school started that she would pay for my sister's tuition since she was the oldest, but I would have to go to college and pay for my own. I remember crying and asking her why she didn't love me as much as she loved my sister. And she insisted that she did, but my sister deserved it more since she was her firstborn. The day I got the scholarship, I spent the whole day excited, telling my parents about it. I think part of me was a little bit happy that I had something that my sister didn't have. My sister spent her entire high school partying and getting bad grades without any reprimands from my parents, and she was only going to college because my parents could pay for it. She wasn't even going to a really good university because her grades were so-so. So the day I rushed home to tell my family that I got a full scholarship to a prestigious university, I had never been so excited to share good news with my family. But when I got home and told my parents about my scholarship, all my dad said was, "Good job," and my mom didn't even look up from her phone or react in any way. Then she ignored me for the entire week after I shared the news. I tried to ask her why she was mad at me for getting a scholarship to college, but she literally wouldn't look me in the eye and walked into another room. It was like she literally hated me for getting a scholarship when most parents would be thrilled. That's when I began to understand how alone I was, and how isolated my family wanted me to be. I didn't understand why my mother had me, to spend her life hating me, and in turn, making me hate herself. The day I got the scholarship was one of the worst days of my life, when I cried myself to sleep and accepted that I would never have a loving family like my sister. and I despised her for it. That night, I wrote in my journal until dawn about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was tired of being that sad little girl, and I decided that I would transform every ounce of rage into academic success. Instead of throwing myself a pity party and begging my parents for love and attention, I was going to redirect all my attention and energy into school, like I always had, and give myself what they never could. I was going to be stable, independent, smart, and educated, even if they never loved me. And so I did. I studied and graduated with honors. I got a fantastic job at the company I interned at right out of college, and I've been making six figures since I was 23. When I came home for the holidays, I would tell my family about my successes, and I would get the occasional compliment from distant relatives. But my own parents never did anything to acknowledge or congratulate me on my accomplishments. As an adult, I knew better than to tell my mother about my high-ranking position at the company or how much money I made, because I knew it would only make her feel even more hurt. But I told my father, and he even told me once that he was happy for me, which was the kindest thing my parents ever said to me. But even as an adult, my mother still treated me like an uninvited guest, and even though I only saw them on holidays, she did everything in her power to shift the focus away from me if someone asked me a question or directed the conversation toward me. For example, one Christmas dinner, my uncle congratulated me on a promotion I had told him about earlier that day. It was my second promotion at the company, and I had also received a significant pay raise. I had been telling him that I was planning to buy my first house. My uncle mentioned the promotion and the possible house, and several other distant relatives congratulated me and were unexpectedly kind about the news. Another cousin of mine asked me what neighborhood I was house hunting in, and my mom interrupted me and said, "This is boring. Can we change the subject?" Then I heard her mutter under her breath, "That's probably not true." I ended up buying a house that year, and when I posted about it on social media, everyone in my family liked it except my mom. I knew she was probably mad because my sister had the complete opposite life experience than me. She went to college straight out of high school, all paid for by my parents, and ended up dropping out and getting pregnant by her first boyfriend in college. I had a sneaking suspicion that my parents asked her to get rid of the pregnancy, but she ended up leaving it and trying to fix things with the father of her child, who she had only known for 4 months. Well, it turned out that they were completely incompatible, but I guess that didn't stop them from trying to fix things or resolve their relationship by having another child. I remember having to hold back tears when I saw her posting about the birth of her second child, because I knew the child was probably being born into a toxic environment, since my sister was such a horrible person, just like the father of her child. I would meet him for holidays, but he never bothered to remember my name or talk to me, and every year he would bring trays of food without bringing anything. Apparently my sister and I hadn't gotten any better as we got older, and we barely spoke once we moved out of our parents' house. We were connected on social media, and the few times we saw each other for holidays, my sister would make nasty comments about my weight or clothes. I honestly think she was just projecting, because I wear a lot of designer clothes and like to switch up my designer bags, and she would constantly ask me which fake bag I brought this time. One time, as soon as I walked in on Thanksgiving, she looked me up and down and literally said, "I see you're dressed like that stuck-up bitch again." It was so ridiculously rude and inappropriate, and she even insulted me repeatedly in front of her kids, using swear words and everything, even though her kids were little. I don't feel bad saying that my sister is a total jerk, and that I didn't feel sorry for anything I did after she dropped her kids off on me for no reason. One weekend morning I was just relaxing at home after a long week of work when the doorbell rang, and I was completely shocked to see my nephews, ages 10 and 7, standing on my doorstep with overnight bags. When I asked them what they were doing there, they said their mom was going away on vacation for 8 weeks, and that she said I would babysit them. My sister and I hadn't spoken since the 4th of July barbecue, where she told me not to take more than one plate because she was tired of looking at my muffin top. I had no idea why she thought I would babysit her for 2 months for free. My nephews were nice, quiet kids who were obviously confused too, so I let them in while I started calling my sister. My sister ignored my first 10 calls, but I kept going until she finally answered. As soon as she answered, I told her that there was no way I was going to watch her kids, and that if she didn't pick them up ASAP, I was calling Child Protective Services. I was literally Googling the number for Child Protective Services while I was on speakerphone with her when she dropped the bomb. Her voice got incredibly low and scary as she blackmailed me, saying that she was going to call my work and tell them that I wasn't taking my bipolar meds, and they would fire me. Even though my sister was an idiot who didn't understand anything about my job, my career was the most important thing to me, and I couldn't risk someone threatening my position there. I just hung up after she said that and tried to figure out what to do next. I felt like my head was going to explode from the stress. Not only was I unable to watch her kids, but I also had a trip planned in a month to visit my long-distance boyfriend Eric in Australia and meet his family for the first time. We had been dating for a while, and I had been looking forward to this trip all year. It was so important because he was introducing me to his mom and dad, and I wanted it to be perfect. Now my life was in chaos just because of my sister, and I had no idea what to do. I had no idea who else to turn to other than my mom, and I shouldn't have been surprised that she sided with my sister like she literally always did. I told my mom that my sister hadn't even come to drop her kids off, and she said they were old enough to come home to me on their own. My mom started guilt-tripping me, telling me that my sister had done so much for me and that I should have been there for her at least once since I never was. This made me go crazy, and I screamed at her at the top of my lungs, asking if she could think of one reason why my sister had been there for me or had improved my life in any way. I told my mom that neither she nor my sister had ever been there for me and treated me like I was some dirty dog in their house instead of their own family. I demanded that my mother come to me so that if the worst came to the worst, I could leave my mother in my house and fly to Australia to be my niece and nephew's nanny instead. I had very little hope that my sister would give up her trip to come back for her children, since she had dropped them off at my place so quickly. When my mother finally came to me, she was as cold as ever and looked at me with the same hateful eyes she always looked at me. We sat in my living room, and my mother explained to me that I was, as always, a terrible sister to my sister, and lectured me on how families should be there for each other in difficult times. I ignored all my mom's boastful nonsense and demanded to know exactly what kind of vacation my sister was taking was so important that she would forget her kids and leave them with someone who basically hated her despite being her own sister. I told my mom that everything about it was weird and suspicious, and my sister disappearing for 8 weeks without warning and leaving 2 small children behind didn't make sense. And then I wanted the truth, if I was going to be dragged into this, without consent. That's when my mom's face changed, and she finally admitted to me that my sister wasn't just going on vacation, she was actually flying to her sugar daddy. I literally laughed when she said this because I thought she was joking, but her face was completely serious. I was so emotionally drained at that point, and I snapped at my mom, asking how she could agree with this. I told her that she had raised a total failure of a daughter who left the country to be with a sugar daddy instead of just getting a job to support her kids. My mom, of course, threw everything back in my face and defended my sister as always. And at one point, she even said that no matter how much money I had or how nice my house was, I would always be an ugly duckling compared to my sister. Born ugly, I would die ugly. After she said that, I had to stop myself from grabbing her by the shirt and throwing her out of my house. When I screamed at my mom to get out of my house, she screamed back that she wasn't leaving, and when I tried to get her out of the room, she pushed me hard into the coffee table that had one of my favorite vases on it. My boyfriend gave it to me last time he visited, and it was one of my favorite things. But after my mom pushed me into the coffee table, it fell on the floor and broke into many little pieces. Looking at the vase broken on the floor, I felt just as broken, and I think I had a complete breakdown and started screaming and crying at my mom to get out of my house because I was calling the police. I'm so sorry because my nephews probably heard me from the other room, but I was hysterical at that moment. It was such a long, painful day. After I finally managed to get my mom out of the house, my nephew poked his head out of the room and asked me if everything was okay. Their eyes were wide, and they looked so nervous and sad it broke my heart. Even though I knew them very little, they were just kids with a terrible mother, and I felt so bad for them in that moment. I ordered them takeout, and we watched movies and played video games together in the living room until they slept late. When I finally got through to her, I immediately started yelling at her for completely disrupting my life, and mentioned Child Protective Services again. My sister let out an evil laugh on the phone, and again said it was my choice, that I would either watch her kids or lose my job. At one point, she hissed that she knew I was worthless without my job, and that I would be a failure again without her. It stabbed me right in the heart, because it was so true. I had a degree and a solid resume, but I really identified with my career success, and I would do anything to keep it. At that point, I was crying and asking my sister why she hated me so much and why she left her little kids for a sugar daddy. She simply said that she was the type of woman who could make millions from a sugar daddy in 2 months, and that it was something I should never worry about. I think she was just trying to break me down and make me feel small. At that point, I gave in, and honestly, it worked. We exchanged words for a while until my sister literally hung up on me after a final threat to contact my work, and I burst into tears again, realizing that I had no power over her. My nephews were downstairs watching a movie in the living room, so I had privacy upstairs and decided to call my boyfriend. I hadn't had a chance to talk to him since my nephews were left on my doorstep, and I ended up bursting into tears and telling him every detail of the situation. I couldn't hold back my tears as I told him about my sister's threats and my mom's constant disrespect, and told him how completely trapped I felt by my sister. Even though he was on the other side of the planet, my boyfriend made me feel loved and supported, and was literally the only person who was on my side, and I am so grateful for him. He said that my sister may have been committing multiple crimes by abandoning her children and threatening me with career blackmail, and that I needed to get hard evidence of her actions. He suggested that I contact my sister again and try to get her to repeat the threat of false medical accusations, but this time secretly record the conversation as evidence. My boyfriend knew about my past with my sister and mother, and pointed out that my sister was clearly not herself, and it wouldn't take much for my sister to act on this threat, and that I should do everything I could to prepare. Of course, it scared me, but he was 100% right. I knew my sister was crazy, more than anyone, and I decided to go along with his plan, even though I still felt very emotionally overwhelmed by everything that was going on. I still wanted my nephews to feel comfortable and cared for. I knew what it was like to be a child in a home where you weren't wanted, and I never wanted these innocent boys who were my own to feel that way. I ended up going downstairs and playing a multiplayer video game with them for a while, and it was really fun. They were so surprised that I knew how to play a first-person shooter, and they were so sweet, giggling and laughing as they watched me get call after call. I didn't expect to bond with them after such a stressful weekend, but when we ordered pizza together and had a contest to see who could eat the most pepperoni, I realized that I actually loved these two boys. They weren't like their mother at all. Even though I knew my sister wasn't a good mother, they were both very polite. And even though it took them a while to come out of their shells, they were both really sweet and funny little boys. They were very good at cleaning up after themselves and always said please and thank you. As I was hanging out with my nephews until the afternoon, I realized that they both had holes in their socks, and my oldest nephew's clothes looked a little small on him. I looked through the rest of the clothes my sister had packed for them, and realized that they were all old or too small for the boys they were intended for. Again, I wasn't particularly surprised that my sister was a cheap, neglectful parent, and I decided to take my nephews to the mall to buy them a new wardrobe. I almost cried several times during this trip to the mall because my nephews had completely come out of their shells and were so excited and happy running around the mall. Like I said, I remember what it was like to be an abandoned child, and I just wanted them to feel like they could have whatever they wanted, and that I was there for them and wanted to make them happy. So whenever we passed a store window and they wanted to go into the store, we went in and I kept buying them whatever they wanted. There was no other way. My youngest nephew was missing his 2 front teeth, and every time he gave me his silly little empty smile, my heart would sink and I would have to buy him another treat or toy. They left that day with new clothes that fit them perfectly and were comfortable, and I also bought them both Nintendo Switches. It was so hard not to spoil them. I didn't have kids of my own, and I had enough money to buy them everything they wanted. When I bought them a Switch, they both burst into tears and hugged me, and I noticed the 10-year-old started crying again on the way home, and I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked me why I was being so kind to them and why they deserved it. I told him they deserved my kindness because they were my boys too, and that they were kids, and that alone meant they deserved to be happy. That only made him cry harder, and he told me he was mad at his mom for keeping us apart. It broke my heart, and I told him I was sorry we didn't get to know each other sooner. But I was really happy that he and his brother were here with me now, even if I didn't expect it. I asked him a few questions about his home life, and it was exactly as I expected. My oldest and youngest nephews slowly started opening up to me and telling me how bad their mom was sometimes to them. My heart broke into a million pieces when I heard it. I knew my sister and her baby's father were horrible people who probably did this, but hearing it directly from them and hearing the pain in their voices was another thing. When we got home, I cooked a big dinner for all of us, and they played on their Switches for the rest of the night. I left them alone in the living room to go call my sister again in my room, ready to play out the plan my boyfriend had given me. This time I tried to stay calm and collected on the phone, even though I wanted to call my sister every name imaginable. And it wasn't hard to steer the conversation toward a medical accusation. As soon as I mentioned Child Protective Services again, my sister panicked and threatened me, insisting that I would be fired for being secretly crazy, and that she didn't care if I actually took my meds. No one would know if she lied. She was simply telling me that no one would believe someone as crazy as me and that I didn't deserve my job anyway. I honestly think my sister was high herself during this call because she sounded like a drug addict and just kept repeating crazy phrases. After I got what I wanted from the call, I hung up while my sister continued to say that I don't deserve anything in life. I don't deserve anything over and over again. Oh well, I pushed her words out of my head, making sure I successfully recorded the entire conversation. I had my sister on audio saying that she was going to make false medical allegations to my employer. I realized how genius my boyfriend's offer to get this recording was, and began emotionally preparing myself for the consequences if my sister followed through with her threat. After receiving the recording, I tried to calm down and put my nephews to bed. The next morning, before they woke up, I called Child Protective Services as soon as the line opened and relayed the entire situation. I explained how my sister had abandoned her children and how we had become completely estranged. I even went so far as to say that not only had she abandoned them, but that she had left them there under completely false pretenses, and then used manipulation and coercion to force me to take care of them. I was surprised that Child Protective Services was actually very helpful, and I shared the recording with them. The agent I spoke to listened to the recording for a moment and said that it was clear that my sister had been using blackmail to neglect her children and had certainly committed multiple crimes. The agent informed me that they would be investigating immediately and that my sister would be contacted as soon as possible. I was shaking after the call and tried to recover as best I could and spend the rest of the day with my nephews, relaxing and bonding with them. My mom called me the next day, and I have no idea why I even answered. I think I was just still very confused and emotionally vulnerable and ended up getting into another huge fight with her over the phone. I let it slip that I had called Child Protective Services, and then my mom hung up on me as soon as I said that. I admit I was shaking after those calls. Just calling Child Protective Services was so nerve-wracking, and then confronting my mom over the phone and telling her about Child Protective Services felt like a huge mistake. I didn't regret calling Child Protective Services, but I knew my mom would do anything to protect my sister and that she didn't care about my nephew's safety any more than she did my sister. All I really knew about my mom was that she hated me, and she loved my sister, and I was sure what was going to happen next. There was no way my mom was going to immediately contact my sister after she found out I had contacted Child Protective Services and try to put her 2 steps ahead of me. I was sure she had hung up to call my sister immediately, and by the next day my sister would know about my call to Child Protective Services. I had a sleepless night, and the next morning when I arrived at work, my secretary informed me that my supervisor had scheduled a meeting with me before lunch, which meant it was urgent. As nervous as I was to find out about this unscheduled meeting, I knew it was coming, and like I said, I knew my sister was crazy, and it was clear all she wanted was to ruin my life. I sat down in the meeting and cracked my knuckles to release the tension I was feeling. My 2 supervisors were there as well as one from management I had never met before. They all looked at me suspiciously, and I felt like an insect under a microscope. As expected, they explained to me that a trusted source in my family had contacted them and informed them that I may not be taking my medication for a severe mental illness. They even told me that they had been given extreme details about past mental breakdowns I had had, and they were concerned that I might have a psychotic break in the office. But neither they nor my sister knew how prepared I was for this meeting today. Of course, I knew that my sister would follow through on her threat. She had always hated me, and the possibility of taking away my high-paying job would be the ultimate dirty trick on her ugly little sister. And I knew she would be quick to do it, but she would relish it if I wasn't babysitting her nephews. Even if I hadn't called Child Protective Services, I'm sure she would have held it against me and would have continued to blackmail me into doing whatever she wanted for her. So in a way, I was glad to get it over with and get all of my sister's nonsense out of the way. I got out my briefcase and gave all the executives a copy of the letter from my doctor, along with the attached paperwork proving that I had been faithfully following my medication regimen. There was evidence going back almost 5 years that I had never missed a prescription refill date and that my medications were regular, as were my moods. I had confirmation not only from my primary care physician, but also from my general practitioner and my psychiatrist. I provided my supervisors with an informative but brief explanation of my family issues and my sister's own mental health issues, and informed them that the allegations were completely unfounded, and they could be confident in my stability based on all the medical documentation I had provided. My managers took some time to go through all the paperwork, but once they saw that I had medical evidence from multiple doctors, they seemed completely satisfied and even apologized to me for the inconvenience of calling me to this meeting and explained that they simply had a duty to do their due diligence before they closed the case. One of my managers even took the opportunity of the meeting to congratulate me on the successful quarter I had just had, and bragged about my work to the other managers, which looked great. I literally left the meeting giggling at how well it went, despite the reason, and thinking about how badly my sister's stupid plan had gone. I could barely focus on work for the rest of the day, because I kept smiling stupidly every time I thought about how I was going to call my sister after I got off work and tell her how her plan had failed. I called my sister as soon as I got back in the car that day and nearly cried laughing, telling her how the meeting had only taken about 15 minutes because she sounded so crazy and stupid on the phone, and my bosses would never believe her in the first place. My sister was furious and accused me of lying, saying she was sure I was fired and that I was just trying to save face. This made me laugh even harder, and I told her that she had failed at trying to fire me, just like she had failed at everything else in her life. I told her that the only skills she had as a woman in her late 30s were lying and failing, and that even her own children were disappointed in her. My sister had lost everything again and just kept calling me a bitch and a slut over and over again, claiming that I had completely betrayed her and said that she was getting on the first plane back and that she would make me regret everything I had ever done to her. I was still laughing after the call, but when I got home and reunited with my nephews, who were in a much better mood since they had been dropped off at my place, I realized that this whole situation was far from over and could get worse before it got better. All I knew for sure was that my sister was completely out of her mind and was now flying home from another country to get revenge on me. I realized that I was honestly scared of what was going to happen next. My sister had nothing to lose, and she was always frantic, and I began to fear for my safety. Then I started thinking about my nephews. I wondered if I had made a mistake calling Child Protective Services. A big part of me wanted my sister to lose her passport overseas and never come back. I had grown so close to my nephews over the last few days, and I knew my heart would break when they had to leave. I didn't want to say goodbye to them. I didn't want to watch them walk into my sister's arms again. She was doing the same thing my mother did to me, and I realized I hated her more than anyone on this earth. I checked on my sleeping nephews because I couldn't sleep, because my mind was racing, and I cried silently in the hallway. As I closed the door to the guest room, I realized that these were such innocent boys, and they didn't deserve any of this. The next day was complete chaos. I was awakened by a knock on the door, although it sounded like a sandbag being slammed against my front door over and over again. When I opened it, my sister was standing there next to a guy who had to be about 6'5" and weigh almost 300 pounds. He was gigantic, and one of his arms was the size of my head. I could barely see my mom standing right behind him. And before I could open my mouth to tell them to get off my property, the man put his hand on my shoulder and pushed me back hard. My sister, my mom, and the stranger walked into my house, and I collapsed to the floor as pain spread through my shoulder, where the man had thrown me. I immediately started yelling at my sister for bringing a stranger into my house and yelling at him not to touch me, but he only seemed to speak Russian. I had no idea how this was even happening, and then I realized that my sister had beaten Child Protective Services to it. They were supposed to come around 11 a.m. that day, but my sister kicked down the door of my house at 8 a.m. My nephews were woken up by all the noise and came out of the guest room with bleary eyes. At that point, I tried to get between them and protect them from the stranger, but my sister yelled at the man to take my nephews to the car. It was complete chaos. Once they realized what was happening, both of my nephews started begging their mother to leave them with me. I tried again to pry my oldest nephew out of the giant stranger's arms, but this time he grabbed my head and slammed it against the wall. I saw stars as I sank to the floor and watched as he carried my two little nephews out of my house. There was nothing I could do. My mom was crying too, but she left with them. Before they all left my house, my sister came up to me while I was holding my head in my hands, and when I looked at her, she spat right in my face. It was the most disgusting thing anyone had ever done to me, and one of the worst days of my life. They all drove away in this giant black SUV that I had never seen before. I had no idea who this man was, and I couldn't believe the trauma my sister had just inflicted on everyone. She didn't even let them take their things with them. They left without clothes, any of their games, or their breakfast. My heart broke for them, and I had an anxiety attack like I never had before. I didn't realize how much it would hurt to take care of my nephews, but I truly loved these boys with all my heart, and I just wanted to protect them and take care of them in a way that I was never taken care of at their age. But now they were scared, with no shoes and some random car with my crazy sister and a giant stranger. I was so disgusted by my mother's behavior, I couldn't believe that she just stood there and watched as this huge man threw me around my house and dragged my nephews out of their aunt's house without a word. I couldn't believe how angry my family had become, and I couldn't stop thinking about my nephews. After I calmed down from the anxiety attack, I realized that I needed to get myself together, and that time was of the essence, and I didn't have much of it. When I finally came to my senses, I immediately called the police, and it turned out that they were already aware of the ongoing investigation due to the involvement of Child Protective Services and the open case against my sister. I gave them all the details of what had just happened in my house just a few minutes ago, and the officer on the line was actually incredibly helpful. My voice was shaking, but I tried to stay calm and focused as I described the stranger, and I played with the image of the license plate in my mind. Luckily, due to my heavy work responsibilities, I am accustomed to noticing and remembering small details that others ignore, and I somehow managed to remember every number and letter on the SUV's license plate. I gave the police a description of the stranger, the full license plate number, and a description of the clothes my mom and sister were wearing. I really think my sister was high on some kind of stimulant when she came to my house this morning. She looked absolutely wild and had this wild glint in her eye. I think she had been using since arriving overseas, wherever she was on holiday with her sugar daddy. My sister was crazy, but it was like something inside her had snapped, and I had never seen her act so truly frantic and out of touch with reality. After I gave the police every little detail I could remember about my sister and the car they left in, I hung up the phone and did everything I could to distract myself, but I literally couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't take a nap, I couldn't watch anything on TV. I just saw my little nephews' faces every time I closed my eyes, and I couldn't think of anything else except making sure they were okay. I thought more about my mom and why she always made excuses for my sister, and how that allowed my sister to grow into a truly evil person. I even thought about my sister's trip, wondering what she was doing there, if she really had a sugar daddy, and how much he paid her. I wondered if the money I made on the trip was really worth it. I even thought about what it would be like if it was just me and my nephews. I had a room for them, and now I definitely had a room for them in my heart too. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted that outcome. My sister out of the picture, and just me and my nephews. I could give them everything my sister couldn't, and if my sister and I were in front of a judge in a custody battle over my nephews, the judge would be looking at one woman with a sugar daddy overseas and another with multiple degrees and a penthouse office. I tried to think positively, but random dark worries about my nephew's safety would creep into my mind. I wondered if the giant man she brought into my house was her sugar daddy. I wondered if he was with my nephews. I was just lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, overthinking, not realizing how much time had passed when I finally got the call from the police. They had been searching for the SUV my sister had driven away in for hours and had finally found them. The officer who called me back was the same one from before and continued to be very helpful and shared many details with me. He told me that they had 3 different police cars on the scene when they pulled the black SUV out because they knew the man had already been aggressive that morning. As expected, even with a gun pointed at him, the man lunged forward and tried to attack the officer and ended up getting shot in the thigh. He punched 2 officers in the head and gave a female officer a black eye. My sister also physically attacked the officer who tried to handcuff her first. I tried to picture it. My crazy sister and a giant stranger physically fighting a group of cops on the side of the highway. I couldn't believe that something like this was actually happening in my family. And I wasn't just watching it on reality TV or anything. I was still reeling from the shock of everything the officer had told me about my sister's arrest when he started saying that my sister actually wanted to talk to me. I couldn't believe my ears, and he confirmed that my sister was sure she wanted to use her one call on me. I asked the officer if he thought she was going to ask me for bail money, and he honestly said, "Yeah, that's what she was screaming about." I told the officer I wasn't even going to answer her call and that she could rot there as long as I wanted. The officer eventually laughed knowingly, and I finally ended the call without speaking to my sister. It was a complete mess. Even though my sister was finally behind bars where she belonged, I had learned that my nephews were in the custody of Child Protective Services. And even though they were safe, I was very worried. Plus, I only had one day before my trip to Australia, and if I didn't go, I would lose thousands and thousands of dollars in bookings. Also, like I mentioned, if I canceled this trip, it would be extremely disrespectful to my boyfriend's family before I even had a chance to meet them. I was planning on marrying my boyfriend one day, and the last thing I wanted was to make a bad first impression on his family if I was going to be in their lives forever. I called Child Protective Services to check on my nephews and just asked to talk to them, but they wouldn't let me. I tried to explain to them that I was family and possibly the only mentally stable family they had, but they didn't care. I was dealing with a different department than the one I had previously contacted, and they were relentless. At that point, I was completely emotionally drained and officially out of options. I spent the rest of the week trying to prepare for the trip as best I could, still suddenly crying every time I thought about my nephews and wondered where they might be. I felt so sad because my boyfriend and I had been looking forward to this trip for so long. And now it was finally here, and I was completely distracted and full of anxiety. Every conversation we had in the week leading up to my flight ended with us discussing how nervous and stressed I felt. Although my boyfriend was incredibly kind and supportive as always, I was so angry at my sister for the way she treated her nephews and me, and I couldn't believe how my life was being ruined because of my sister's only choice to go to her stupid sugar daddy. I was so grateful that my job was understanding, but the thought of my sister trying to fire me so quickly left me feeling so betrayed and disappointed. Everyone in my family, even my dad, was way out of the picture and out of all the drama, even though he probably knew about it. He was spineless, just like my useless mom. My mom didn't even care about her grandchildren. She condoned my sister's stupid decisions, and it led to her grandchildren being cared for by strangers. I was sitting at the airport bar the day I was leaving for Australia, having 2 drinks, when I started looking at some photos I had taken of my nephews when they were staying with me. We took these silly photos in a photo booth at the mall together, and I couldn't help but start crying again about how much I loved them and missed them. I decided that would be the last time I cried until I landed back in America and told myself that I really needed to try to enjoy my time with my boyfriend and his family. I had a life too, and I couldn't let my sister ruin my time, even though she was thousands of miles away. My time in Australia was amazing. I hadn't seen my boyfriend in months, and when he picked me up at the airport and lifted me up like a princess, my heart exploded with happiness. I've been through so much in the last few weeks, and just being back in the arms of my boyfriend, who was so warm and caring towards me, made me feel healed, and he spent every moment of the trip taking care of me. Meeting his family was great, and I immediately hit it off with both of his parents as soon as I was introduced. It turned out they were really fun, active people, and we did a lot of sightseeing together where they showed me their favorite nature trails and views in their area. At one point, my boyfriend took me on a hike, just the 2 of us, to his favorite secret waterfall, and we skinny dipped and just swam and laughed and kissed for hours. It was one of the most romantic days of my life, and I couldn't believe how perfect the trip had been, even though I was so worried before leaving. But of course, when I got home, the nightmare with my sister started all over again. A couple of days after returning to the U.S., I decided to go to the local police station to formally file a report against not only my sister, but also my mom for trespassing. They literally had this man pick me up and push me aside so they could break into my house, and I wasn't going to let that go. When I went to file the report, I found out that there was an ongoing Child Protective Services investigation into my sister, and I was a little disappointed to learn that they hadn't found anything yet. If they had just talked to my nephews, they would have understood what they had been through. Plus, my sister had literally been arrested with a guy who had assaulted multiple police officers. And so I didn't see how that proved that she was clearly an unfit mother for my nephews. I left the police station that day, happy that charges had been filed against my family, but incredibly disappointed to learn that the Child Protective Services investigation was still ongoing. I was constantly worried about my nephew's safety, and knew that being with strangers couldn't be good for them, even if it was better than being with my sister. I also couldn't stop thinking about how my sister had dragged them out of my house that morning, without letting them take any of their things. My youngest nephew had a little stuffed dog that he literally carried everywhere. I had been sleeping with it since my sister picked up my nephews that day, and it would make me cry in the morning just waking up and seeing that little stuffed dog looking at me. Like I said, my sister wouldn't even let them put their shoes on. The poor boys were probably so disoriented and felt so lost and abandoned, and I just wanted to make it right for them. But I felt like I had no power until Child Protective Services finally made a decision. About a month after my sister was arrested, after calling Child Protective Services every day and demanding updates on her case, they finally came to a conclusion. They made the decision to formally take both of my nephews away from my sister and place them in protective care. When the Child Protective Services agent first explained this to me, I was annoyed. I asked him how this was any different from what had been going on, and he said that this now meant that not only was my sister being taken to court, but she would have to go to court if she ever wanted to regain custody of her children. I asked the Child Protective Services agent if she was likely to win if she tried to regain custody, and the Child Protective Services agent told me that it depended on whether other more suitable relatives came forward to claim custody of my nephews. I knew right away that this was exactly what I was going to do and opened a separate court case to try to win custody of my nephews. I didn't care how long it took. I didn't care how much the legal fees were, and I decided to hire the best attorney I could afford to work on my custody case, because I knew it was one of the toughest legal battles you could possibly fight. But before the custody case even started, a case I had filed against my sister for trespassing on my home began. I know some people might judge me for suing my own sister, but I would have literally fought her in the Wendy's parking lot at that point. But I decided to follow the law if I ever wanted custody of my nephews. At the end of the day, that was my only goal in all of this. I just wanted my sister out of the way and my nephews to come home to me. The first day of our trial, I saw my sister in court, and it was the first time we had seen each other since the day she broke into my house and let a man assault me. Our last interaction was me looking at her and her spitting a huge wad of drool right in my face, so you could tell neither of us were happy to see her. Well, the trial started, and eventually the judge mentioned that I had opened a custody case against her for full custody of my nephews. I guess her public defender hadn't informed her before, and she found out about it in the courtroom for the first time that day. Well, my sister has never been one to react well to bad news, and after the judge dropped the news of my custody charges against her, my sister completely flipped out. Even though we were in the courtroom, my sister slowly turned her body towards me, screamed my name, and then pounced on me like a mad hyena. She scratched and clawed at my face and tried to pull out clumps of my hair. Soon the bailiff came and pulled her away from me, but before he could get to her, she bit me on the forearm really hard. It was one of the worst pains I have ever felt in my life, and the bite looked horrible and eventually got infected. All this happened right in front of the judge, and when everything calmed down, I knew that my sister had just signed her own death warrant. It took months and months, almost 2 years in fact, for all the criminal charges against my sister to go through and for her to finally be locked up for a long time. She was serving a life sentence thanks to all her crimes stacked on top of each other, and there was no way she would see the light of day anytime soon, considering her chances of appeal were very slim. I never dropped the trespassing charges against my mom, and the only way my mom stayed out of jail was by testifying against my sister in court and framing her. I don't think I've ever felt such sweet satisfaction as watching my mom blame my sister for everything that happened, crying her usual crocodile tears. I couldn't believe that my mom had finally betrayed her perfect, golden child, even though it had taken her entire life and the government's help to do so. I knew that day, looking at my mom on the stand, that it was the last time I would ever see her. It was the last time I wanted to see her. I had seen enough of her and my sister in my lifetime, and I had had enough of their constant toxicity. My sister had completely turned my life into a never-ending court battle, and I just wanted to have a normal, everyday life again. The custody battle for my nephews dragged on. My nephew's father and his family began battling me in court for full custody of them, and it just dragged it out even more. I didn't care. There was no power on earth that could keep me from my nephews. Now that my sister was behind bars, it took almost 2 years of court battles, but in the end I won full custody of my boys and brought my nephews home. I will never forget how big their smiles were and how tightly they hugged me when they came home and found the bedrooms I had decorated for them in my house. I walked into my youngest nephew's bedroom and he ran up to me to show me his newfound Switch. I surprised him with my little stuffed dog and gave him a big hug as he fell into my arms. The next thing I knew, my oldest nephew had joined us, and both boys were crying into my hair and telling me how much they missed me. My oldest boy looked at me, smiled with his big teary eyes, and simply said, "I knew it, Auntie. I just knew you'd come back for us one day. 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 Back for us one day.